runaway slave returns at midnight, but it's the master's wife waiting in the barn, not the ally Solomon had arranged to meet. In the oppressive darkness of Tennessee, 1833, he crept through shadows, his heart pounding with each step toward the weathered structure where his only chance of survival supposedly waited. As he slipped through the door, the lantern light revealed Eleanor's face, her presence meaning certain death if discovered. Yet the look in her eyes told a different story altogether. What began as a desperate journey back to see his dying mother was about to become something far more dangerous for them both. Solomon's lungs burned as he moved through the Tennessee woods, each step bringing him closer to the plantation he'd risked everything to escape 3 months prior. The August night air hung thick with humidity, mosquitoes swarming in the darkness as he followed the North Star, not away to freedom this time, but back toward bondage. His calloused feet, hardened from years of fieldwork yet still tender from his journey, found familiar paths through bramble and underbrush that his body remembered even as his mind fought against returning. He'd traveled 15 miles since sunset, avoiding the main roads where slave patrols hunted for men like him. Twice he'd frozen in the shadows as lantern light approached, holding his breath as white men on horseback passed, their dogs sniffing the air but failing to catch his scent thanks to the pungent herb mixture an old woman in the free settlement had given him to rub on his clothes. The letter had reached him in the free black settlement near Nashville through a network of sympathetic travelers. His mother was dying, and she had asked for him. Just one visit. Just one goodbye. The thought of her face, lined with years of suffering yet always somehow maintaining a quiet dignity, drove him forward when fear threatened to turn him back. "I'm coming, Mama," he whispered to the night air. The words, disappearing into the symphony of cicadas and whip-poor wills that serenaded his dangerous homecoming. The plantation's familiar outline emerged through the trees, the big house on the hill, dark except for a single window, the slave quarters, silent in the midnight hour, and the barn, where Jeremiah, an elderly field hand who had helped raise Solomon, had promised to meet him. The sight of it all, the fields he'd worked since childhood, the outbuildings he'd helped construct with his own hands, the fences that had both contained and defined his existence, sent a chill through his body despite the summer heat. Solomon paused at the edge of the woods, scanning for any movement. Being caught meant certain death. Master Caldwell had publicly promised to hang any runaway who dared return. The memory of the last public punishment on the plantation made his back ache with phantom pain, but the grounds appeared deserted, with only cricket songs disturbing the silence and the occasional flutter of bats hunting insects in the moonlight. He darted across the open field, keeping low, his heart hammering against his ribs with such force he feared it might be heard. The tall grass whispered against his legs as he moved, counting the seconds of exposure until he reached the barn's shadow. 3 soft knocks, their old signal, and he slipped inside, the familiar smell of hay and livestock enveloping him like a forgotten memory. He expected Jeremiah's weathered face and whispered directions to his mother's cabin, perhaps a quick embrace from the man who'd been more father to him than his own, lost to a fever when Solomon was just 7. Instead, a lantern flared to life, illuminating Eleanor Caldwell's face, her blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders, blue eyes wide with something Solomon couldn't read, not the hatred he expected, nor the alarm that would mean his death. Something else entirely, a mixture of fear, determination, and something deeper that made his skin prickle with unease. "Solomon," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hand that held the lantern. The light caught the fine embroidery on her nightdress, covered partially by a dark shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "I've been waiting for you." He froze, one foot already turning to flee, muscles tensed for the sprint that might save his life. The master's wife, here, alone, in the middle of the night. It was a trap, it had to be. Yet no shouts came. No men with guns emerged from the shadows. The only sounds were their breathing and the occasional shifting of animals in their stalls, unaware of the dangerous tableau unfolding in their midst. "Jeremiah couldn't come," she continued, taking a step forward, her bare feet visible beneath her nightdress, incongruous and strangely vulnerable on the dirt floor. He was sent to the eastern fields yesterday. The overseer's been watching him since your escape. They suspected he might have helped you." Solomon's hand tightened on the knife hidden in his coat, the weapon that had been his constant companion since fleeing north. His mind raced with calculations: the distance to the door, the chances of making it back to the woods if he ran now, the possibility that armed men waited just outside. "Why are you here, then?" he asked, his voice a harsh whisper, unfamiliar to his own ears after so many weeks of speaking freely in the settlement. "To call your husband? To have me dragged back in chains? To watch them make an example of me come morning?" Eleanor shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving his. A strand of golden hair fell across her face, but she made no move to brush it away. "No. I'm here because I know why you've returned." She set the lantern down on a barrel between them, the light creating a small circle of visibility in the vast darkness of the barn. "Your mother doesn't have much time, Solomon, and I'm the only one who can help you see her before she's gone." The mention of his mother made his resolve waver. He'd come too far to turn back now, had risked too much. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" he demanded, though something in her expression, a earnestness he remembered from the few times they'd interacted over the years, made him want to believe her. "You don't," she admitted, her shoulders straightening slightly. "But if I wanted you captured, I would have brought my husband or the overseer with me. I would not be standing here alone, risking everything." She glanced toward the barn door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. "We don't have much time. Your mother has been asking for you in her fever. The doctor says she won't last until morning." Solomon felt the weight of decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Trust the master's wife, the woman who had sat at dinner tables while his people were beaten, who wore fine dresses bought with the profits of their labor, or flee now and never see his mother again? "Why would you help me?" he asked, the question that had to be answered before he could take another step. Eleanor's gaze dropped for just a moment before meeting his again with new intensity. "Because not everyone is who they appear to be, Solomon. Some of us wear masks to survive." She reached slowly into a pocket of her shawl and withdrew a small folded paper. "And because I made a promise to someone we both care about." But what Solomon didn't know was that Eleanor had been waiting for this moment for months, and she wasn't alone in her dangerous secret. Behind her carefully constructed life as the plantation mistress lay a network of hidden alliances and buried truths that would soon shatter everything he thought he knew about the Caldwell plantation and his place within it. Eleanor's words hung in the air between them, the folded paper in her outstretched hand like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Solomon stared at it, unmoving, caught between suspicion and desperate hope. "What promise? To whom?" he finally asked, not yet reaching for the note. "To Jeremiah," she replied, her voice barely audible over the nervous shuffling of horses in their stalls. "And to myself." Solomon's eyes narrowed. "You and Jeremiah have an understanding?" A sad smile touched Eleanor's lips. "More than you know, more than anyone knows." She glanced toward the barn door again, tension visible in the line of her shoulders. "But explanations must wait. We have perhaps 20 minutes before my absence might be noticed." Against every instinct for self-preservation, Solomon took the folded paper. Inside was a crude map drawn in charcoal, showing a path behind the slave quarters that avoided the main house and the overseer's cabin. At the bottom was a message in a shaky hand he recognized as Jeremiah's. "Trust her. She knows the way. Your mother was moved to the old storage shed behind the smokehouse 3 days ago," Eleanor explained, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "They didn't want her illness spreading to the other workers. I've been bringing her medicine, but—" She left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Solomon folded the paper and tucked it inside his shirt. "If this is a trap—" "It isn't," she interrupted, a flash of impatience crossing her face. "But we're wasting precious time. Follow me, but stay in the shadows. If we're seen together, we're both dead." She moved toward the back of the barn, to a small door used for throwing out soiled hay. Before opening it, she turned back to him, her face half in shadow. "When we reach the storage shed, I'll enter first to check that no one else is there. Wait for my signal, 3 taps on the window before you come in. Solomon nodded, his hand still resting on the knife in his coat. Trust wasn't something he gave easily, especially not to someone from the big house. But the thought of his mother, alone and dying, steeled his resolve. Eleanor slipped through the door first, and Solomon followed moments later, staying low and keeping to the deepest shadows. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate by, but not enough to expose them to any watching eyes. They moved in silence, Eleanor leading the way with surprising stealth for a plantation mistress, her knowledge of the ground's blind spots suggesting this wasn't her first clandestine journey. As they approached the slave quarters, voices drifted through the night, 2 men talking in low tones. Eleanor froze, raising a hand to halt Solomon. He pressed himself against the wall of a tool shed, hardly daring to breathe as the voices grew louder. Can't be trusted. Not after what happened with Solomon. Came a voice Solomon recognized as belonging to Silas, the cruel overseer who delivered more lashes than any man should bear in a lifetime. The master wants extra patrols for the next week, replied another voice. Says he has a feeling about this time of year. Anniversary of that escape and all. Eleanor glanced back at Solomon, her eyes wide with warning. They were trapped between the approaching men and the open ground that led to the storage shed. There was nowhere to hide except, without hesitation, Eleanor stepped out from the shadows, adjusting her shawl and adopting an entirely different posture. Straight-backed, chin lifted, the very picture of authority. "Mr. Silas," she called, her voice transformed from the urgent whisper of moments ago to the cool, commanding tone of the plantation mistress. "What brings you out at this hour?" The footsteps stopped abruptly. "Mrs. Caldwell?" "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out here alone at night." "I couldn't sleep," she replied smoothly. "The heat, you know. And I wanted to check on old Martha before morning. I promised Dr. Williams I'd ensure she took her medicine." Solomon held his breath, pressed so hard against the shed wall he could feel every splinter through his shirt. "Let me escort you back to the house, ma'am," Silas offered, suspicion evident in his voice. "One of the house girls can tend to Martha." "Nonsense," Eleanor replied with a dismissive wave that Solomon could only imagine from his hiding place. "I've already disturbed your rounds. Continue your patrol, I insist. I'll be perfectly fine, and will return to the house shortly." There was a moment of hesitation before Silas reluctantly agreed. "As you wish, ma'am, but Mr. Caldwell wouldn't approve of you wandering about at night, especially with all this talk of runaway slaves in the county." "Then we needn't mention it to him, need we?" Eleanor's voice carried a hint of steel beneath its genteel surface. "Good night, gentlemen." Solomon listened as the men's footsteps receded, heading away from their destination. Only when they had faded entirely did Eleanor return to the shadows. "They'll circle back this way in 15 minutes, she whispered urgently. "We must hurry." They crossed the remaining distance quickly, the small storage shed now visible, at the edge of the property. A faint light flickered from its single window, a candle left burning for a dying woman. Eleanor approached the door first, as planned, and slipped inside. Solomon counted the seconds, his pulse racing, until 3 soft taps came from the window. He moved swiftly to the door and entered. The smell hit him first, illness and medicine, and the unmistakable scent of approaching death. The shed was little more than a room, with a makeshift bed against one wall. On it lay the diminished form of Martha, his mother, her once strong frame now so thin it barely made an impression on the thin mattress. "Mama," he whispered, falling to his knees beside the bed. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to disbelief, and then to joy so profound it transformed her gaunt face. "My boy," she breathed, reaching a trembling hand toward him. "My Solomon, you came back to me." "I'm here, Mama," he said, taking her hand in both of his, shocked by how light it felt, how fragile the bones beneath the skin. Eleanor moved to the door. "I'll stand watch," she said quietly. "Take what time you have." As she turned to leave, Martha called out, "Miss Eleanor." When the white woman looked back, Martha added with surprising strength, Tell him. He needs to know. Eleanor's face paled. This isn't the time. There won't be another time, Martha insisted, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Tell him what you know. About his father. Solomon looked between the two women, confusion replacing the emotional reunion. My father. He died when I was young. What is there to tell? Eleanor stood frozen by the door, conflict visible in every line of her body. Finally, she turned back to face them fully, her shoulders set with resignation. Your father didn't die of fever, Solomon, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He was killed because he discovered something he wasn't meant to know. Something about this plantation. About the Caldwell family. She took a deep breath. About my husband's father, and yours. The candle flame wavered, casting shifting shadows across the small shed as Solomon stared at Eleanor, her words echoing in his mind like distant thunder. The air in the cramped space grew thick with unspoken truths, decades of secrets suddenly threatening to spill forth in this most precarious of moments. What are you saying? He finally managed, his voice hardly more than a rasp, his throat constricted with emotion and disbelief. His mother's hand tightened around his, drawing his attention back to her face lined with years of hardship but suddenly alight with a fierce determination that reminded him of her strength in earlier years, before work and sorrow had bent her frame. Your father, Joseph, was the old master's son, Martha said. Each word measured and deliberate, despite her labored breathing. Her eyes, clouded with illness, cleared momentarily with purpose. William Caldwell, senior fathered children, with several women on this plantation. Most were sold away before anyone could notice the resemblance, the set of their jaw, the particular way their eyes crinkled when they smiled, telltale signs that would have brought scandal upon the family name. She paused, gathering strength, her chest rising and falling with effort beneath the thin blanket. But your father, another labored breath. Your father remained because his mother died in childbirth, and the old master felt some small measure of guilt, perhaps the only guilt that man ever knew. Solomon shook his head, denial rising instinctively, a protective reflex against a truth too painful to absorb. No, that can't be. The words died on his lips as memories surfaced, whispered conversations that ceased when he entered rooms, strange looks from white visitors who came to the plantation, comments about his height, his bearing. Little moments that had seemed insignificant at the time now aligned into a pattern he couldn't ignore. It's true, Eleanor interrupted, moving closer to the bed, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath her careful steps. I discovered it after marrying Thomas. There were letters, accounts hidden in the study, locked in a compartment beneath the floorboards. Your father learned the truth when he was about your age. He found documents, birth records that old William had carelessly preserved. Her voice lowered, heavy with the weight of history. Your father confronted him, demanded recognition, freedom for himself and his family. And they killed him for it. Martha finished, her eyes now fixed on some distant point beyond the shed's walls, seeing perhaps into the past, to that terrible day 20 years earlier. Said it was fever, but I saw the marks on his body when they brought him to me. No fever leaves a man with broken ribs and rope burns on his wrists. Her voice cracked. No fever leaves finger-shaped bruises on a man's throat. Solomon felt as though the ground beneath him had disappeared, leaving him suspended in a void of confusion and rage. The plantation master, his grandfather, the man whose name had been spoken with fear and reverence throughout his childhood, the same blood that ran through the veins of the man who had ordered him whipped for breaking a plow until his back was a canvas of scars. If this is true, he said slowly, each word deliberate as he processed this revelation, then Thomas Caldwell is your half-brother. Eleanor confirmed, her face a mask of conflicted emotions, pity, guilt, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Though he doesn't know it. Or at least, I don't believe he does. His father took that secret to his grave 7 years ago, buried alongside so many others beneath the family plot where only white Caldwells are permitted to rest. Martha's breathing grew more labored, a rattling sound emerging from her chest that drew Solomon's attention back to the reason for his dangerous return. He dipped a cloth into the small basin beside the bed, gently wiping her forehead as he had seen her do for him when childhood fevers had taken hold. "Why tell me this now?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. "What difference does it make? I'm still a runaway. I'm still hunted. This blood means nothing in a world that sees only my skin." "Because," Martha whispered, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong jawline that he now realized might be his inheritance from a man he had feared and hated all his life. "There's more at stake than you know. This plantation, the Caldwells, they're involved in something dark, something your father discovered, something worth killing for." Eleanor moved to the window, peering out into the night, her profile sharp against the faint moonlight filtering through the dirty glass. "We don't have much time," she warned, tension evident in the rigid line of her shoulders. "Silas will be circling back soon. He's always been too thorough for his own good or anyone else's." "Tell me," Solomon demanded, looking between the two women, his mother's frail form and Eleanor's straight-backed silhouette, creating a stark contrast, different worlds colliding in this small space. "If I'm risking my life by being here, I deserve to know everything." His mother's eyes found Eleanor's, a silent communication passing between them that spoke of shared secrets and unlikely alliance. Martha nodded almost imperceptibly, granting permission for truths long held close to be finally revealed. Eleanor stepped away from the window, moving closer to the bed, her voice dropping even lower as if the very walls might betray their conversation. "The Caldwells aren't just plantation owners," she said, each word carefully chosen. "They're part of a network. Men who traffic in more than cotton and tobacco. They move people free, black people, captured in the North and sold into slavery here in the South. Your father found documentation, proof that could have exposed them to federal authorities." "Slave catchers," Solomon breathed, the pieces falling into place like a terrible puzzle. He'd heard whispers in the free black settlement about such operations, kidnapped children and adults who had never known slavery, suddenly thrust into chains with no legal recourse, their papers of freedom destroyed, their previous lives erased as thoroughly as footprints in sand after high tide. "Not just catchers," Martha corrected, her voice growing fainter, each word a struggle against her failing body. "Creators. They forge papers, change identities, make free people disappear into bondage. The profits? Enormous." Her eyes closed briefly, the effort of speaking draining what little strength remained. "More lucrative than any crop, human cargo that can be sold again and again." Solomon felt sick, the horror of it washing over him in waves, bile rising in his throat as he contemplated the scale of such evil. He thought of the new faces that occasionally appeared in the fields or kitchens, their accents different, their eyes haunted in ways that differed from those born into slavery. He had assumed they were simply purchased from other plantations. Now he understood the deeper, more sinister truth. "And Thomas? Is he part of this?" he asked, dreading the answer yet needing to know if the man who shared his blood was complicit in such depravity. Eleanor's hesitation told him everything before she even spoke, her fingers twisting the fabric of her shawl in an unconscious gesture of distress. "He joined his father's business interests 3 years ago. I didn't know what it entailed at first. By the time I understood," she trailed off, guilt evident in her expression, in the way she couldn't quite meet his eyes. "By the time she understood," Martha continued, her voice barely audible now, "she was trapped. A wife has no rights separate from her husband, no property of her own, no escape." She reached out, her trembling hand finding Eleanor's, an unlikely solidarity between women separated by circumstance, yet united in their powerlessness, within a system that benefited neither. Solomon looked at Eleanor with new eyes, seeing beyond the fine clothes and privileged position to the gilded cage she inhabited, the mistress of the plantation, yet as confined in her way as those who worked the fields. "So you've been helping from within," he said, realization dawning as memories shifted in his mind. The missing medicine from the house stores, the extra food that sometimes appeared in the quarters, the warnings before particularly brutal overseers were hired. "That was you." Eleanor nodded, a flush rising to her cheeks, not of shame but perhaps of relief at finally being recognized for small acts of rebellion that had gone unnamed for years. Small things, nothing that would raise suspicion. And messages, when I could manage it. Information passed to Jeremiah, who has connections with the Underground Railroad. Names of sympathetic farmers who might offer shelter, routes that avoided the most vigilant patrols. Jeremiah. Solomon couldn't hide his surprise. The old man had always seemed so cautious, so careful to appear obedient, his back bent not just from age but from what appeared to be a lifetime of submission. The perfect mask, he now realized. He's been working against the Caldwells for decades, Martha said, pride evident in her weak voice. Since they killed his wife in 09 for trying to run with their youngest son, he and I. We found ways to resist. Small ways. Messages hidden in laundry. Conversations in code during Sunday gatherings. Records kept of every person who disappeared. Every family separated. A hidden history that someday might bear witness. A sudden spasm of coughing overtook her, her frail body convulsing with the effort, each hack seeming to tear something essential from within her. Solomon supported her shoulders, his heart breaking as he felt the bones prominent beneath her thin shift, the once strong woman who had carried him, fed him, protected him, now reduced to this fragile vessel. When the fit passed, blood flecked her lips, bright crimson against her dark skin. "Solomon," she gasped, clutching his shirt with surprising strength, her fingers like claws desperate for purchase in a world that was slipping away from her. "You must take it. The proof. It's still here, hidden where your father put it before they killed him." "What proof?" "Where?" he asked, bending closer to catch her fading words, memorizing the contours of her face, knowing with growing certainty that these moments were precious and finite. Martha's eyes fluttered, consciousness slipping away momentarily before she rallied, her will stronger than her failing body. The old oak. North corner of the property, hollow at the base, covered with a flat stone. Papers there. Names. Dates. Enough to destroy them. Her gaze intensified. Burning. With purpose. Enough to bring justice for hundreds. Eleanor moved suddenly from the window, tension vibrating through her slender frame. "Someone's coming," she whispered urgently, her earlier composure fracturing under immediate threat. "We need to leave. Now." Solomon bent to kiss his mother's forehead, tears finally breaking free to track down his cheeks, falling onto her face where they mingled with her own. "I'll come back for you," he promised, the words thick in his throat. "We'll get you away from here. Find a doctor in the north. There are treatments." Martha shook her head weakly, a sad smile touching her lips. "No time for that, my son. I'm going to join your father soon." Her eyes, suddenly clear and focused, held his with an intensity that belied her physical state. "But you can finish what he started. Take the evidence to the federal marshal in Nashville, the one they call Hammond. He's not in their pocket. He'll help." "Solomon," Eleanor hissed from the door, her face pale with fear as she peered into the darkness. "We have to go. Silas is heading this way with lanterns. There are others with him." He squeezed his mother's hand one last time, memorizing the feel of it. The calluses earned through decades of forced labor, the gentle strength that had guided him through childhood. He knew with crushing certainty this was their final goodbye, that he would never again hear her voice or feel her touch. "I love you, Mama. Live free," she whispered, the ghost of a smile touching her bloodied lips, her eyes already seeing something beyond the confines of the small shed, perhaps a glimpse of whatever waited beyond this life of suffering, live for all of us who couldn't. And remember, blood is more than heritage. It's choice. It's action. You choose your true family through what you do in this world. Eleanor pulled him toward the door, her urgency breaking through his grief, her hand surprisingly strong on his arm. They slipped out into the night, just as lantern light appeared around the corner of the smokehouse, bobbing yellow orbs that cut through the darkness like searching eyes. Instead of heading back toward the barn, Eleanor pulled him in the opposite direction, toward the dense woods that marked the property's eastern boundary, her skirts gathered in one hand to allow for quicker movement, her knowledge of the plantation's layout clearly extensive. "Not the way I came," Solomon protested in a whisper, trying to orient himself in the darkness, calculating the safest route back to freedom. "They'll be watching that route now," she replied, her knowledge of the patrol patterns evident in her confident movements, despite the fear that made her voice tremble. "There's another way, through the creek bed. Harder to track. The dogs lose the scent in water." As they reached the tree line, shouts erupted behind them, Silas's voice, raised in alarm, followed by others. The shed door slammed open, lantern lights spilling out into the night. They had been discovered. "Run," Eleanor urged, pushing him ahead of her toward the deeper shadows beneath the trees. "The North Oak is half a mile that way, past the lightning-struck pine. Get the papers. I'll create a distraction. They'll know you helped me," Solomon argued, unwilling to leave her to face the consequences of such betrayal. He had seen what happened to those who aided Runaway's punishments, designed to serve as examples, to extinguish any spark of resistance in others. Eleanor's face, pale in the moonlight, showed no fear, only determination, a resolve that reminded him strangely of his mother's expression moments earlier. "They'll suspect, but they won't be certain. I can handle my husband." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "I've been handling him for years." More shouts. Closer now. Dogs barking in the distance, the baying sound that haunted every runaway's nightmares. "Go," she insisted, her eyes darting toward the approaching lights. "Find Hammond. Finish what your father started." She pressed something into his hand, a small leather pouch that clinked softly with the unmistakable sound of coins. "Money. Enough to get you to Nashville. And this." She pulled a simple gold band from her finger. "If you need more, it was my mother's." Solomon gripped her arm, a lifetime of questions and revelations swirling between them, this unlikely alliance forged in the crucible of shared purpose, if not shared experience. "Why risk everything for this?" "For me." Eleanor's eyes met his, and in them he saw a resolve that matched his own, a determination born perhaps of different circumstances but no less powerful. "Because we share more than you know, Solomon. Thomas isn't the only Caldwell with secrets." She glanced back toward the commotion, then pushed him firmly toward the woods. "Now go, and don't look back." As Solomon plunged into the darkness of the forest, the weight of his mother's final words and Eleanor's unexpected alliance propelled him forward. Behind him, the plantation that had defined his existence erupted into chaos lanterns, bobbing like fireflies, dogs baying, men shouting orders and accusations. He ran toward the North Oak and the secrets buried beneath it, toward a truth that would either set him truly free or lead him to his father's fate. The night enveloped him, branches catching at his clothes, as if the very land sought to hold him back, to reclaim him for the life he had escaped. But he pushed forward, each step taking him further from bondage and closer to purpose. He would not waste his mother's sacrifice. He would not squander Eleanor's dangerous gambit. He would bring the Caldwells to justice, no matter the cost. And perhaps, in doing so, he would finally understand the complicated legacy of blood and choice that had shaped his life from before he was born. The sound of pursuit faded behind him as he found the creek bed Eleanor had mentioned, the cool water a momentary relief as he splashed through it, following its winding path deeper into territory he had rarely been permitted to enter. Somewhere ahead lay the North Oak and its hidden treasure, proof of atrocities that might finally bring a reckoning to those who had built their fortune on stolen lives and broken bodies, including, he now knew, his own father's. The creek bed narrowed as Solomon pushed deeper into the woods, the water cold against his ankles despite the August heat. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in dappled patches, just enough to guide his way without betraying his position to any pursuers. The sounds of the plantation, shouting men, barking dogs, Eleanor's voice raised in what he imagined was feigned confusion, grew fainter with each careful step. His mind raced faster than his feet, processing the revelations that had upended everything he thought he knew about himself. Caldwell blood ran in his veins, the same blood as the man who had ordered him whipped, who trafficked in human lives, who had perhaps ordered his own father's murder. The thought made bile rise in his throat, but he forced it down. Blood might be inheritance, but as his mother had said with her dying breath, it was also choice. And he chose freedom, justice, everything the Caldwells stood against. The creek bent sharply to the east, but Solomon continued north, leaving the water to minimize his trail. According to Eleanor's directions, the lightning-struck pine should be visible soon, a landmark to guide him to the oak that held his father's dangerous legacy. As if summoned by his thoughts, the distinctive silhouette appeared ahead, a tall pine with its top sheared off by some long-ago storm, its jagged crown reaching toward the night sky like an accusing finger. Solomon paused, listening intently for any sound of pursuit, hearing nothing but the natural chorus of the forest crickets, frogs, the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures. He continued forward, moving with greater caution, now that he had left the creek's protection. The North Oak stood in solitary majesty at the edge of a small clearing, its massive trunk, wider than 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder, its sprawling branches creating a canopy that had witnessed generations of Caldwells and those they enslaved. How fitting, Solomon thought, that his father had chosen this ancient sentinel as the guardian of truths too dangerous to speak aloud. He approached reverently, aware that he stood where his father had stood 2 decades earlier, perhaps with the same mixture of fear and determination coursing through his veins. Kneeling at the base of the enormous tree, Solomon ran his hands over the ground, searching for the flat stone his mother had described. The eastern side of the trunk revealed nothing but roots and soil. The western side proved equally barren. Panic began to rise in his chest. Had someone found the cache before him? Had his mother's memory failed her in her final moments? Then, on the northern face of the tree, his fingers encountered something different, a stone that didn't match the surrounding soil. Too perfectly flat to be natural. He scraped away the decades of accumulated leaf litter and dirt, revealing a smooth river rock about the size of a dinner plate. With trembling hands, he lifted it. Beneath lay darkness, a hollow in the tree's base, invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. Solomon reached inside, his heart pounding so loudly he feared it might alert any nearby patrols. His fingers touched something wrapped in oilcloth, preserved against the elements. He pulled it free, cradling the package as if it were made of the finest china. The distant baying of hounds jolted him back to his immediate danger. They had the dogs on his trail now. Even the creek wouldn't throw them off for long. He needed to move, to put as much distance between himself and the plantation as possible before dawn. With careful movements, he secured the oilcloth package inside his shirt, replaced the stone to hide any evidence of his discovery, and rose to his feet. The North Star shone bright above the clearing, a celestial guide to freedom. He would follow it as he had 3 months earlier, but this time with purpose beyond his own liberation. Solomon had traveled perhaps 2 miles when he heard the dogs again, closer now, their excited howls indicating they had found his scent. The hunters would not be far behind. He quickened his pace, pushing through underbrush and thorny vines, ignoring the scratches that drew blood from his hands and face. Ahead, the ground sloped downward toward what sounded like running water larger than the creek he had followed earlier. A river, perhaps. If he could cross it, he might have a chance to break the trail. The trees thinned, revealing a dark ribbon of water cutting through the landscape, its surface reflecting the night sky. The Harpeth River, He recognized it from his previous journey, wide enough to be a significant barrier, but not so wide that crossing was impossible. The hound's baying grew louder, spurring him forward. Solomon waded into the cold water, gasping as it rose to his waist, then his chest. The current was stronger than he remembered, tugging at his legs, threatening to sweep him downstream. He fought against it, keeping his arms raised to keep the precious package dry. Halfway across, a shout echoed from the bank behind him. Turning, he saw lantern light through the trees, moving rapidly toward the river's edge. They had found his crossing point. With renewed desperation, Solomon pushed forward, each step a battle against the current. The water deepened unexpectedly, forcing him to swim, one arm cutting through the river while the other held the package aloft. His lungs burned, muscles screaming from the strain of fighting both water and fear. Finally, his feet found purchase on the far bank. He dragged himself from the river, water streaming from his clothes, and plunged immediately into the cover of trees on the opposite shore. Behind him, angry voices debated the safest crossing point, buying him precious minutes. Solomon didn't stop until the sounds of pursuit had faded completely, until his legs threatened to buckle beneath him, until the first faint light of dawn began to color the eastern sky. Only then did he allow himself to collapse against the trunk of a sheltering oak, his breathing ragged, his body trembling with exhaustion. With careful movements, he withdrew the oilcloth package from inside his shirt. Miraculously, it had remained mostly dry, despite the river crossing. He unwrapped it with reverent hands, revealing a leather-bound journal and several folded documents, their edges yellowed with age. The journal bore no name, no identifying marks on its cover. Solomon opened it, squinting in the dim pre-dawn light, to make out the neat, precise handwriting that filled its pages. His father's hand, it must be, a record of crimes so terrible they had cost Joseph his life, preserved for 20 years in the patient embrace of the North Oak, waiting for this moment. The first entry was dated the 17th of April, 1825. Today, I discovered the true nature of Master Caldwell's business arrangements with Northerners Abbott and Finch. They are not cotton buyers as claimed, but traffickers in human flesh. 3 free black men arrived today, chained and beaten, their papers of manumission stolen or destroyed. One claimed to be a shopkeeper from Philadelphia, another a carpenter from Boston. Their accents confirm their stories. They will be sold at auction in Nashville next week under false identities. This is the 4th such delivery this year that I have witnessed. How many occurred before I began keeping count? Solomon's hands shook as he turned pages, each entry documenting names, dates, descriptions of people stolen from freedom and sold into bondage. His father had created a meticulous record of the Caldwell family's most profitable and heinous enterprise. Tucked between the journal's pages were the documents shipping manifests disguised as agricultural inventories, correspondence between William Caldwell Sr. and his northern accomplices, financial records showing profits that dwarfed those from cotton or tobacco, and most damning of all, a list of powerful men throughout Tennessee and neighboring states who protected the operation, who ensured that any complaints from those claiming to be wrongfully enslaved were dismissed without investigation. Judges, politicians, law enforcement officials. The corruption extended far beyond the Caldwell plantation, forming a web of complicity that had allowed this atrocity to continue unchecked for decades. Solomon carefully rewrapped the evidence, securing it inside his shirt once more. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, heavier than any burden he had carried in the fields. This was why his mother had summoned him back from freedom. This was what Eleanor risked her life to help him obtain. This was his father's legacy, not Caldwell blood, but Caldwell crimes, documented with the hope that someday someone might bring justice. That someone was now him. As dawn broke over the Tennessee hills, Solomon rose to his feet, orienting himself once more by the landmarks he had used during his escape months earlier. Nashville lay approximately 30 miles northwest. Federal Marshal Hammond, the man his mother had named, represented his best hope of putting these documents into the hands of authorities who might act on them rather than bury them. The journey would be perilous. Every slave patrol in the county would be searching for him. The Caldwells, if they suspected what he carried, would stop at nothing to prevent him from reaching Nashville. And even if he succeeded in delivering the evidence, there was no guarantee that justice would prevail against such powerful enemies. But, as he set off through the awakening forest, Solomon felt something he had not expected: hope, fragile but persistent, like the first green shoots after a forest fire. His father had died for this truth. His mother had held on to it through 20 years of grief and servitude. Eleanor had risked everything to ensure it reached the right hands. He would not fail them. The morning sun filtered through the trees, warming his face as he walked steadily northwest, each step carrying him farther from bondage and closer to purpose. Whatever Caldwell blood might flow in his veins, his heart belonged to those who had sacrificed for freedom: his parents, the people documented in his father's journal, and countless others whose stories had never been told. In his mind, he could still hear his mother's final words: "Live free. Live for all of us who couldn't." And so he would. The August sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the morning mist that had provided Solomon with brief concealment. He kept to the densest parts of the forest, avoiding roads and open fields where he might be spotted. The evidence pressed against his chest beneath his damp shirt, a constant reminder of his purpose and the danger it represented. His stomach growled, reminding him that it had been nearly a day since he'd last eaten a meager meal of jerky and hardtack before he'd set out for the plantation. The small leather pouch Eleanor had given him contained enough coins to purchase food, but venturing into any settlement to do so would be foolhardy. A black man traveling alone, especially one matching the description that would surely be circulating by now, would draw immediate suspicion. Solomon paused beside a blackberry thicket, the fruit mostly picked over but still offering a handful of ripe berries. He ate them quickly, the tart sweetness barely taking the edge off his hunger. Water was a more pressing concern. The exertion of his escape and the summer heat had left him dangerously parched. Following the gentle slope of the land, he made his way toward what he hoped was a stream or spring. The sound of trickling water soon confirmed his instinct, leading him to a small brook cutting through the forest floor. Solomon dropped to his knees, cupping the cool water in his hands and drinking deeply, then splashing his face and neck. As he straightened, a twig snapped somewhere behind him. Solomon froze, every sense suddenly alert. The forest had gone quiet, no birdsong, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Someone was there, watching. His hand moved slowly toward the knife at his belt, his only weapon against whatever threat approached. Before his fingers could close around the handle, a voice spoke from the shadows. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, friend." Solomon turned, slowly to face a man standing 20 feet away, a rifle held casually but unmistakably aimed in his direction. The stranger was white, perhaps 50 years old, with a graying beard and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. He wore simple homespun clothing, neither rich nor ragged. "I mean no harm," Solomon said carefully, raising his hands to show they were empty. "Just passing through." The man studied him with narrowed eyes. "Passing through mighty fast. I'd wager there's patrols out searching for a runaway, offering a handsome reward too." He gestured with the rifle. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Solomon's mind raced through his options. None of them good. He could run, but the rifle would find him before he made it 10 steps. He could fight, but even if he somehow overpowered this man, the commotion would likely draw others. Or he could try the truth, or at least part of it. "I'm a free man," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I have business in Nashville." "Free man, eh?" The stranger's expression remained unreadable. "Got papers to prove that?" Solomon hesitated. He had papers, forged documents, that had helped him reach Ohio 3 months earlier, but they were hidden miles away in the free black settlement he'd fled to after his escape. Carrying them on this journey would have been too risky. If he'd been caught on the plantation, such papers would have been immediate evidence of outside help. No, sir, I don't. The man sighed, shifting his weight but keeping the rifle trained on Solomon. That's unfortunate. Makes it your word against whoever's offering that reward. He paused, then added, $200 is a lot of money for a poor farmer like me. Solomon's heart sank. $200 was indeed a fortune to most people in these parts, more than enough to overcome any moral qualms about returning a man to slavery. He thought of the small pouch of coins and Eleanor's ring, but knew they wouldn't amount to even a quarter of that sum. I can't match what they're offering, he admitted, but I can tell you that the men searching for me are involved in crimes far worse than helping a man escape bondage. Something flickered in the stranger's eyes. Interest, perhaps, or skepticism. That so? What kind of crimes? Solomon weighed his next words carefully. Revealing too much could be dangerous, but this might be his only chance to avoid being turned in. They're kidnapping free black people from northern states and selling them into slavery here in the South. I have evidence that could stop them, if I can get it to the federal marshal in Nashville. The man's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained guarded. That's quite a tale. Convenient, too. It's the truth, Solomon insisted, desperation edging into his voice. I swear it on my mother's grave. The stranger studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in his face. Then, unexpectedly, he lowered his rifle. Your mother, he said quietly. Would that be Martha, from the Caldwell plantation? Solomon stared at him, shock rendering him momentarily speechless. How did you? The description they're circulating is pretty detailed. Solomon, son of Martha, property of Thomas Caldwell, 6 foot tall, scar across the right shoulder blade, speaks above his station. The man's mouth twisted in what might have been disgust. They're saying you attacked your mistress and stole valuables before running. Anger flashed through Solomon at the lie. I never touched her. Eleanor, Mrs. Caldwell, she helped me. She's the one who told me where to find the evidence. The stranger's eyes widened slightly at this genuine surprise, breaking through his careful neutrality. Is that so? He murmured, almost to himself. Then, coming to some internal decision, he slung the rifle over his shoulder. My name's Jacob Miller. I have a small farm about a mile from here. Not much to look at, but there's food, clean water, and a cellar where you can rest without worry of being found. Solomon hesitated, suspicion replacing fear. Why would you help me? Jacob's weathered face softened slightly. Let's just say I have my reasons for disliking the Caldwells and their kind. And if what you're saying about kidnapping free people is true. He shook his head. Well, that's the kind of evil that can't be allowed to stand, no matter what color the victims are. Still wary, but seeing few alternatives, Solomon nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jacob warned. Getting you to Nashville won't be easy. Every patrol in the county will be looking for you, and if the Caldwells suspect what you're carrying, they'll have men watching the main roads into the city as well. You know a different way? Solomon asked, hope kindling despite his caution. Jacob smiled for the first time, a grim expression that spoke more of determination than humor. I know several, but first, you need food and rest. Follow me, and stay low. They moved through the forest with practiced stealth, Jacob leading the way with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the land. After nearly an hour of careful progress, they emerged at the edge of a small clearing. A modest cabin stood in its center, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Behind it stretched a few acres of cultivated land, corn, beans, and what looked like tobacco growing in neat rows. Wait here, Jacob instructed, handing Solomon a canteen from his pack. Let me make sure it's safe. Solomon watched as the farmer crossed the clearing openly. His posture relaxed, as if he had nothing to hide. He disappeared into the cabin, emerging moments later to wave Solomon forward. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs, and basic furnishings. A woman stood by the hearth, stirring something in a cast-iron pot that filled the single room with a savory aroma that made Solomon's stomach clench with hunger. "This is my wife, Sarah," Jacob said. "Sarah, this is Solomon." The woman was perhaps a decade younger than her husband, with streaks of grey in her dark hair and kind eyes that assessed Solomon without judgment. "You look half-starved," she said by way of greeting. "Sit, eat." She ladled a generous portion of stew into a wooden bowl and placed it before him with a chunk of cornbread. Solomon murmured his thanks, fighting the urge to devour the food immediately. He ate with as much restraint as he could manage, aware of the couple watching him. When he'd finished, Jacob pulled up a chair across from him. "Now," he said quietly, "tell us exactly what you're carrying and why the Caldwells would pay $200 to get it back." Solomon hesitated, looking between husband and wife. Something in their steady gazes reassured him. With careful movements, he withdrew the oilcloth package from inside his shirt and placed it on the table. "My father created this," he explained, unwrapping the journal and documents. He discovered what the Caldwells were doing 20 years ago and documented everything: names, dates, shipments. They killed him for it, but not before he hid this away. My mother told me where to find it just before she died. Jacob pulled the journal closer, opening it with careful hands. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her expression growing increasingly troubled as they read. "Dear God," she whispered, after several minutes, "these are people's lives. Hundreds of them." Jacob turned pages slowly, his face hardening with each new entry. "This goes back decades," he said, "and these names—" He pointed to a list in the back of the journal. "Judges, politicians, even sheriffs, all taking money to look the other way. That's why I need to reach Federal Marshal Hammond in Nashville," Solomon explained. "My mother said he's not in their pocket. He might be the only one who can do something with this evidence." Jacob and Sarah exchanged a long look, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Hammond has a reputation for integrity," Jacob finally said, "but getting to him won't be simple. The Caldwells have friends throughout the county, eyes and ears everywhere. We can help," Sarah added, her voice quiet but firm. "We've done it before." Solomon looked between them, realization dawning. "You're part of the Underground Railroad." Jacob neither confirmed nor denied it directly. "Let's just say we believe all people deserve freedom, and we're willing to act on that belief." He carefully rewrapped the journal and documents. "You should rest. There's a cellar beneath the cabin, accessible through a trapdoor under the rug. It's small but secure. Tomorrow night," Sarah continued, "Jacob will take you to the next safe house. It's about 15 miles from here, closer to Nashville. From there, others will guide you." Solomon felt a weight lift from his shoulders, not completely, but enough that he could breathe more easily. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank us yet," Jacob repeated his earlier warning. "The journey ahead is still dangerous. And even if you reach Hammond, there's no guarantee he can protect you from men as powerful as the Caldwells and their allies." "I understand the risk," Solomon said, his resolve strengthening. "But this evidence needs to reach someone who can use it. Too many have suffered already." Sarah nodded, her expression solemn. "Rest now. Tomorrow will come soon enough." The cellar was indeed small, with barely enough height for Solomon to stand upright, but it was dry and contained a straw pallet that felt luxurious after his night of running. As he stretched out in the darkness, his body finally acknowledging its exhaustion, his thoughts turned to Eleanor. What had happened after he fled? Had she successfully diverted suspicion, or was she now facing accusations of helping a runaway? The Caldwells' claim that he had attacked her suggested she might have maintained her cover, perhaps even suggested the story herself to explain his presence on the plantation. He hoped so, despite their vastly different circumstances. He had recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone trapped in a life not of their choosing, seeking whatever small ways they could to resist. His mother's face appeared in his mind's eye, not as he had last seen her, wasted by illness, but as she had been in his childhood, strong and dignified despite the burdens placed upon her. She had kept his father's secret for 20 years, waiting for the right moment, the right person to entrust with the evidence that might bring justice not just for their family, but for hundreds of others. "I won't fail you, Mama," he whispered into the darkness. "I promise." Sleep claimed him then, deep and dreamless, his body surrendering to exhaustion while the precious evidence rested beside him, a record of atrocities committed and a hope for accountability to come. Above, Jacob and Sarah Miller sat at their table long into the night, speaking in hushed tones about the risks they were taking and the reasons they could not do otherwise. They had their own history with the Caldwells, their own reasons for opposing the corrupt system that allowed men to own other men. Tomorrow, they would once again put their lives and liberty on the line to help another soul reach freedom. But this time, perhaps, with the added hope that the evidence Solomon carried might bring about changes more far-reaching than a single escape. Outside the modest cabin, night creatures sang their chorus under a waxing moon, oblivious to the human dramas unfolding beneath its silver light. The North Star shone steadily, as it had for countless others following its guidance toward freedom, its ancient light a promise that even the darkest night eventually gives way to dawn.